Hey, and welcome to Matt and Jess TV. I'm Matt Roast here with Jessica Bun Bun. This is our Only Murders in the Building Season 4, Episode 1 reaction review. The title for this episode, Once Upon a Time in the West. Are you ready, cowpokes? We have a
Oh.
new season upon us.
I'm so excited. I love Hollywood and the idea that they're making a movie. It's for those of you who are new to the channel, my background is in film. I was a film director and a writer for a while. So, like, the idea that they're going to be diving into that world is really exciting for me.
When I was in college, I wrote a short story called Hollywood Magic that was about a guy who went to Hollywood and everything turned into a musical. So like clearly this world of old Hollywood and stuff really excites me. I will
Mm.
say really big picture. I like this premiere a lot. It's giving me everything that I want from Only Murders. We've got a
Mhm.
great mystery. We have
Mhm.
a lot to get into there. It's also really funny. You got some great guest stars. This is probably my favorite start to a season since
Mhm.
season 1.
Okay, so if you guys watched our season 3 coverage, we both really liked that season, but for me, it's was the weakest of all the seasons so far, which is saying a lot, for Only Murders, but not in the general TV world, because even like a so-so season of Only Murders is still better than almost everything on
Oh, I
TV. It
know.
was still a really good season.
Hmm.
But the issue that I had with that season, which seems like they've so far, knock on wood, have fixed already this season, is last season was about the play first and the murder like secondary or even third. It was barely even a plot point. But already this season, it's like, yeah, they're going to Hollywood, they're doing this movie. But there was so much about Sazz. There was so
Hmm.
much about her murder and all the clues and going to her apartment and checking this out and talking to people and figuring out. There was so much going on with that.
Yeah, there was, and this time around,
I love that for us.
I listen. We're eating good here. We're here to have a good time. We're here to get into some theories. There is so much to get into after just one episode.
Absolutely. So hit that subscribe button. Stick with
Mhm.
us every single Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. You are going to get our review here at the channel. You can expect it and come here and get that review. Later that same day on Tuesday, you will get a preview. And then on Wednesday, you are going to get a theory. You are getting 3
Yes.
videos from us every single week on Only Murders in the Building. And we're covering some other
Yeah.
shows that are similar as well in the same genre. We're going to be covering Slow Horses for those of you who are interested in that show. I know Matt is a huge fan of that show. He turned me on to it. It's so good.
I am just like bubbling over. I am so back. I'll just put it that way. With slow horses coming back makes me feel more complete. But also, in addition to subscribing, be sure to join our Patreon. We have a link in the description below. Right now, over on Patreon, we are doing this poll of 3 shows that we're going to cover exclusively on Patreon. The one with the most votes that will have exclusive weekly coverage there. Those shows are Tulsa King,
Mm-hmm.
the Penguin, and the Old Man over
Mm-hmm.
on FX. So join our Patreon. You can vote in that poll, and then you can watch exclusively those reviews there all season long.
Okay, we're going to get into some theories, very early theories on who we think the killer is based on the idea of Charles being the intended target, that
Yeah.
it wasn't actually supposed to be Sazz. Because that's how we both came out of this premiere feeling that this is really about Charles, especially with that text at the end. It felt very personal here, okay?
Yeah.
No theories are wrong at this point. Nobody knows who the killer is. We may not have even met them yet. Who
Yeah.
knows? It's up in the air. So I just want to say all theories are correct. So leave them in the comments for us. So if you've got something that we're not covering here, you can like tell us. We can
Mhm.
all chat about it.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to say this with my full chest of who I think the murderer is based on just this episode and nothing else.
Okay.
This murderer's name rhymes with Dracula. It is Scott Bakula. Listen, I love Scott Bakula. I haven't made it any secret in any of these videos. He has been mentioned so much on this show, and we know that he's friends with the creator of this show, so they have a really good
Yeah.
relationship. So for a while, I was like, oh, wait, we're going to see him at some point,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they're friends. This is a huge cast. There's so many iconic people on it. Now, here we are with Scott Bakula. And I'm just like, oh my God. Okay, hear me out. Scott Bakula is a really huge star. I'm not saying I think he's Jesus. I know that he is. He is he's the captain of Star Trek Enterprise. He is part of some of the biggest franchises on the planet. So if you're gonna have him actually take a role on a show, I feel like this guy is not gonna get out of bed to do anything that doesn't start with M and end in Erder. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, maybe he'll do a cameo for his friend, but it's unlikely. I feel like he's going to be here because he's got a bigger role. If you remember in season 2, where it was Poppy was a murderer, and a lot of people were really upset about that, and they were like, oh, there wasn't any clues. There was one major clue at the beginning of the season, which was Poppy was at the Arconia murder scene in the middle of the night. Why was she there? She like doesn't live there. She has no business being there, but here she is, right? And it just feels kind of like it could be that way with Scott Bakula as well. I mean, he's the captain of the Enterprise.
Okay, Scott, you can sit in my captain's chair anytime.
Yo!
Just throw it out there. More than welcome, Mr. Bakula. I got to speak to you professionally here.
Okay, so let's get into the clues of
Okay.
why Scott Bakula is the murderer.
All right.
Full chest. Okay, so we got this text from Sazz after she was dead, right?
Yeah.
So, and it was like, sorry, I had to jet off last minute to cover Bakula on set. So he's already mentioned. And for me, I'm like, well, that covers Scott Bakula from being the killer, right? He has an alibi. He's out in LA, and how could he be there in another apartment killing Sazz or Charles, right? How can he be in two places at once? And the answer is this person was hired. I don't think Scott Bakula or whoever the murderer is the person that's actually pulling the trigger. This looked like a professional hit. Whoever it was that was over there knows how to, use this sniper, get a perfect shot from the other side of the building that way. Like, no way is Scott Bakula or Jan or Cookie or any of these other people on the other side of the building with secret sniper training. This feels like a hired hit. So if we're in that realm, you have to have money to be able to buy somebody to murder somebody else. Having a hired hit, it's not cheap, right?
No.
It'd be like whatever they're charging these days, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000. Scott Bakula has that Star Trek money. He can afford this hit.
Okay. See, Scott, I will say this from the jump. I hope you're right on this, because to me this is by far the most fun idea possible here. And yes, Scott Bakula, you have a ton of money, but you can quantum leap into a truck full of it by taking part in this show and having a good time being the murderer. Like, this would be a really, really fun, really juicy role to take on.
Well, here's the thing too. Okay, so when we finally see Scott,
Yeah.
he's talking to Charles, okay? And he's still dating Joy. He holds up the phone and he won't show it to Charles. He's just like, oh, it's a, not
Yeah.
safe for work type of situation going on here. But there was part of me, like, whoever has the phone killed Sazz, because we know that from the end of it, where they're texting Charles to be like, I'm not your friend. I'm like, ooh, it's the murderer. And then we have this moment where Charles is meeting up with Scott and he holds up a phone that he's looking at, that he starts kind of cackling to himself and is like, I can't show you what's on here. I'm like, is that because that's Sazz's phone? And you know that you already texted Charles to be like, I'm with Scott. Here's my alibi, right? And this other little, it was so small, but the music for Only Murders, the theme song that always plays whenever there's like a really important scene on the show, played for the first time in this episode with Scott. When Scott was trying to be like, oh, I haven't seen her. She was supposed to show up and didn't. And then the music played. I was like, oh, that's on purpose. That's really interesting. So let's get into motive. You
Yeah.
ready for motive?
Oh, I'm ready for motive.
Okay.
This is the big stuff here.
All right, put on your detective caps. Okay, here's his motive. There's two possibilities. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, my background is in film production, directing, writing, production. And what I've seen throughout the years in the industry is like this really weird jealousy from different sort of parts of industry. So like we have the theater people who are kind of jealous of the TV people who are definitely jealous of the movie stars. It's like this hierarchy of like what makes you more famous. I'm not gonna name any names of it, man. Like I've seen some throwdown fights over this stuff. It's really interesting. But anyways, the motive could be as easy as Scott is jealous. Scott is a TV icon. Like there's no getting around it. He's been in some of the biggest franchises. We mentioned Star Trek, NCIS. Like he is very well known in the TV world. But because there is this hierarchy of like theater, TV, movie stardom and that type of fame, and he's in LA, he would absolutely know that this movie is being made even before Charles, which we'll get into because that whole idea that like they're 3 weeks out of production and they haven't gotten the rights to this yet would never happen. Never happen. You've already spent millions of dollars and you don't have the rights. There's no way. But anyways, if you're in LA, whether you're TV, film, or theater, you have a finger on the pulse of what is going on in the industry. You would have heard about it. So Scott would have heard that there is a movie being made about Charles's life. There, he even said, you know, hey, it's nice to see another old white hair guy, you know, moving up, sort of thing. I'm like, is that him actually congratulating him, or is he jealous because he would have known about this movie because he's in the industry? And now Charles is having a movie made about him where he's, you know, basically the star being played by Eugene Levy, who is iconic. And now he's taken that leap, that quantum leap from TV into movie stardom, that this is going to change his entire career now. And maybe there's a jealousy of that.
I think it's a pretty compelling motive just from the vantage point of what is this show interested in? And I think we've seen this through a few seasons now. They're interested in this idea of how important fame is, how important success is. What does that mean for every person? Everybody's kind of constantly striving for something more. So for Scott, like I can see this. If we're trying to come up with like specific suspects, like very specific, blah, 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 very specific, I cannot say that. You know what?
You're the best.
I am the best at pronunciation, guys. If we have very specific subjects coming out of this premiere, Scott's the one that stands out the most, mostly for this reason. Like the motives are there and they're pretty sound.
Yeah, the other motive is Joy. And if we've got a situation where, you know, Joy was treated pretty badly by Charles and now she's with Scott, that could easily be a motive where Scott's like, oh, you're going to treat Joy like trash with this like marriage thing and then she's brokenhearted. Like, I'm not down with that. Or it could be that Joy is still hung up on Charles, and even though she's moved on with Scott, she won't stop talking about Charles, and Scott's like, Charles gotta go, because how am I going to be able to keep Joy if she won't stop talking about Charles? There's a few different motives there, and he's got the money to do it.
Yeah, and if he did do it, I kind of think it's all of the above when it comes to motives, because I think you got to have a lot of deep-seated resentment of somebody to go to the extent that he apparently would be willing to go through in order to make this happen. You need to have money, you need to have resources, and I do think it was pretty curious that if there is some sort of rivalry here, it might be one-sided, because Charles didn't seem like he was altogether upset or angry or whatever to see Scott Bakula. So Scott Bakula, or at least the character version of Scott Bakula, may have all of this like rage boiling up within him.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of the fun thing about this role. We saw Matthew Broderick last season playing himself, but kind of not really, right?
Yeah.
Like it's him, but it's like this really bizarre, creepy version of him. That was so funny, right? And Scott Bakula strikes me as the type of person that's down to make fun of himself and just have a good time. I mean, this show is a good time.
Okay, well, we'll get into where I am now.
Yeah, what's your theory?
Okay, see, as I said, I want it to be your theory just because I think that's way more fun.
I want it to be your theory. I
Okay.
can't wait for everyone to hear it because I think your theory's right.
Well, even if it's right, I still think Scott Bakula is more fun because here's the thing with where I am right now. I don't necessarily have a specific person. I'm not looking at one person right now and being like, oh, you the killer, you did it. I'm thinking more in terms of motive. I think I have an understanding as to what the motive here could be. And it kind of all stems back from the way in which, on a meta level here, Hulu is promoting this show, which they made so much about the movie that's being made. Here are the people who are in the movie. And just because this is a 10 episode comedy show, most of the episodes are like 35 to 40 minutes long. They're not going to have too many storylines going on here that don't end up being connected. Like everything is put together for a reason. And so whoever is responsible for the death of Sazz, which we believe to have been Charles as the intended target, whoever is responsible for that, they have to be involved in the movie to some extent. So here is where I'm landing with it, is that this person decided that they were going to try to take out Charles. I agree with you that this is probably a hired hit. That happened just because even if you're, I don't know, playing GoldenEye on 64 and you think you're really, really good running around with like, you know, the various weaponry in that game, that does not mean you can pull off what this was. This was at night. This was at a distance. It was just a very, very difficult thing to execute. It seems like there was only one shot that ended up even being fired. So that felt very professional. So I do believe that that was a hired attempt. Now we get into what happened here. It obviously didn't work. And we know that whoever is responsible for this moved the body. And we'll get more into that as we sort of progress through the story. So they know that whatever they had attempted to do with Charles didn't end up working. Now, I do have a ton of questions, by the way, as to this person did this. They saw the body hit the floor, yet they still felt the need to go over there, go up into the Arconia to see this person's body. Is this the same person? Is this different people? I think it's all one person, but I think it's very interesting that they did that. But they know, okay, Charles is still out there. Charles is not dead. They know about this movie. So they join the movie to get close to Charles because they have this personal vendetta, something from the past that is making them want to do this. I think this is all tied in some way to Charles's past. They're working on the movie in secret in some sort of role. Now, I want to make the following clear. This is not Eugene Levy. This is not Evil Longoria. This is not Zach Galifianakis. I don't think this is somebody who is a bigwig on the film. And the reason why is that for those of you who don't know, life rights can be a very complicated process, which, as Jess said, it is completely insane that they started making this movie without actually getting these people on board. That would never happen. That is a function of apparently the writers deciding to do this story after season 3, and they just had to find a way to make it work. And so they're making us suspend a little bit of disbelief here. But anyway, I think what's going on here is that none of these bigwigs would have done it because if Charles had died, that would have slowed everything down. That would have made all these sort of legal loopholes. So it would have been really, really difficult to get the movie off the ground. I'm thinking maybe it's one of these schmoes who we just sort of met for like 2 seconds, whose names I do not even remember, who are like, oh, here's this person who works on the movie. Here's that person who works. We saw like 3 or 4 people who I don't even remember their names or anything about them. But that is where I'm going with this. Somebody who may have more money than they're letting on, that they may be able to order some sort of hit out there. Somebody who is tied to Charles's past without Charles necessarily even knowing it.
Listen, we're going to have, as I said, a theory video coming up on Wednesday, and it's going to be our early suspects video. So again, make sure you hit that subscribe button because it's going to include a theory on why Sazz could have set this whole thing up herself to kill Charles. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, no, we have a lot of fun theories that are going to be coming up.
Yeah, like this is where we're landing coming out of this particular episode, just because we're trying to think of the motives that are presented in front of us at this point. There's obviously still quite a bit we don't know. Like, one of the big questions I came out of this, because I watched this episode a couple of times,
Mhm.
I was just thinking a lot about, okay, so whoever did this, they cleaned up the scene to a certain extent.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's still the hole in the window, and Lester ends up getting the cat out of the bag. The Charles near the end of this, but
Mhm.
they were able to go up there, see that this person, Sazz, was dead, then move the body,
Mhm.
take them down to the incinerator, incinerate them, and nobody saw, nobody heard anything, nobody knows.
Let's also talk about that incinerator thing
Okay.
because this whole episode started with the lights kind of flickering and Oliver making this comment. Oh, the last time this was really happening is when people were using the incinerator here in the building, and the tenants aren't allowed to do that anymore.
Hmm.
So who knows that there's even an incinerator in this building? Like, part of me is kind of like, this has to be maybe somebody who lived in this building, like a Jan. I know we know she's in jail, but that doesn't
Yeah.
mean she can't hire somebody out of jail. Like, we think it's a hit, right? So she
Hmm.
doesn't need to not be in jail to be able to explain where things are. I mean, that whole area down there where the incinerator is where they had the big confrontation with Jan, right? So it feels like it needs to be somebody who has knowledge of this building. I don't think that if you're a hired gun, you're going to show up there and know to bring the body down to the incinerator if you don't know that there's one there.
Yeah, and it's definitely not something people would assume. I have never been in a building that had a built-in incinerator. This is not something
No.
where I would be like, "Oh, I'm just gonna take this over here and I'm just gonna burn it up into smithereens." No, no, this is something you clearly have to be aware of.
Yeah, I've lived in renters, like in renters buildings my whole life pretty much, and I've never seen an incinerator in
No,
any of them.
yeah, it's one of these questions that they do have to answer. Like, this is a little one, and this may be something, it may be nothing. Kind of like with you in the Scott Bakula musical clue. I put a lot of stock in these previously on things at the
Mhm,
start of this
mhm, mhm,
episode. And
mhm,
they
mhm.
had in here, Charles explicitly saying that he's going to go up and get this bottle and
Mhm.
that they're going to celebrate. And yet, Saz does it. I went back and I rewatched the end of last season.
Mhm.
We never actually see Charles tell Saz, "Hey, Saz, you want to go and do this?" So why did Saz go up there? I don't have a clear answer to this at the moment. It's just very weird. I don't know if somebody intentionally tried to stop Charles or for whatever reason, just because if I am in the building with somebody or if I'm outside, my home, I'm not going to turn to somebody like one of my friends and then be like, "Hey, you want to go into my home and get something for me?" It's really, really odd.
Okay, let's get into the Sazz of it all. So we know that Sazz has like copied Charles's life down to
Hmm.
what she wears. She wears on and off set. She's dressed like Charles. She's living in his old apartment. She's with his women. Like, she wants to like emulate Charles in all aspects of life. I think if she could just kill Charles and be Charles, she would be Charles and she would just take over that life. But here we are where she is dead. And one of the things that they had said was, listen, I have something kind of sensitive to tell you. Before she died, she told
Hmm.
that to Charles, and he was like, okay, no problem. We'll talk about it later. But then we go to her apartment. So as Charles is getting worried and he's like, man, I haven't seen her in a while. I haven't heard from
Yeah.
her. It's not like her. Oh, we're going out to LA. Cool. We should just stop by her place. Like, whatever. And they go in, none of her mail's getting picked up, and you go in, and because I'm a nosy bee, I like paused it when they were looking through her desk and the things that were on her desk, like a picture of Scott Bakula, which absolutely makes sense. She's going to be the person who's like standing in for him.
Yeah.
Of course, there's going to be a script with a picture of him, but I still feel like it's a little bit of smoke on my Scott Bakula theory. But anyways, there was a whole bunch of other stuff on there that I think we're not supposed to know yet, but feels like clues that we should all like tuck away in our hat. So on Sazz's desk is the numbers 11 and 13, and they're crossed out. And then there's the letters 26 and 14 and 86 that are not crossed out. There's also a piece of paper that says West Tower Arconia there as well. So that's why we're gonna talk in our theory video a little bit about like, his Sazz behind this.
Yeah.
Like, why did she have West Tower Arconia on this piece of paper? There's also another piece of paper that says Dudenoff on it. We don't know what that is at this point.
Yeah.
You know, is this a person? Is this a place? We don't know yet, but it stood out because they showed it twice
Mhm.
as they were going through different things. They showed it like half cut off and then they showed the whole thing. And I'm like, okay, clearly this is important. We're going to write this down, right? It also says cancel doctor appointment, out of town until the 23rd. And I think that the dates are all going to kind of come together at some point. And then there's the last piece of paper says looking at Charles. So there's some clues that are on this desk, but I think it's very purposefully put together in a way that we can't put the clues together yet. But keep them in mind because I think they're going to come back to play.
Okay, I've got a magnifying glass here. Let's
Okay,
just
let's
imagine
go.
it because I don't actually
Yeah.
have one. But okay, see, I'm putting this over West Tower Arconia, and I'm putting it over, you know, the everything connected to Charles himself. Because if somebody had some sort of personal vendetta with Charles involving his past,
Yes.
I think there's a good chance that Sazz knew about it and that somebody was getting a little bit weird when it comes to watching Charles. Maybe she even knew that somebody was watching Charles from like that part of the Arconia. Like maybe, and this is a big stretch, she offered to get the wine bottle herself because she wanted to actually see if this was happening, but she didn't understand necessarily the severity behind what was going on here. Because hey, old buddy, old pal, I've got a sensitive matter to discuss. Maybe you say that if you think, hey, you know, like these people from your past who were sort of creeping around and doing some not great things, they're back. If you know somebody's trying to kill him, then you probably are gonna be like, we need to talk right now.
I guess it depends on how deep the relationship is,
Yeah.
right? Like, if it was you and I knew somebody was trying to kill you, I'm not going to be the same. I'm not going to be like, hey, I need to talk to you about something later. I'm
Yeah.
going to talk to you about it right now.
Yes.
If somebody was out creeping around about you that you have felt uncomfortable in the past, and I know that these people are creeping around about you again, I'm definitely not going to have a whole desk of that and then come to you later to be like, hey, later, let's talk about
true.
that creepy person that's made you feel really weird and is following you around or whatever it is, but I'm going to tell you about it later. I'm going to tell you about it immediately. And because Sazz seemingly, I want to believe, loves Charles to this point that she's like, I love him so much. I want to be this man. Like, he's an icon. I feel like we're one in the same. She would want to protect herself and she would want to protect Charles. And I feel like if it was somebody who was like, if this was like a real threat, she would tell him right away. So like some of the stuff that's on the desk is making me feel like there's a possibility that Sazz might be behind it, right? Like, because I think you would tell me too.
Well, yeah, I think there's something weird going on with Sazz. Whether it is Sazz is actually directly involved, whether
Yeah.
Sazz knows more than Sazz is letting on. I
Yeah,
think
you're right.
Sazz clearly has some sort of secret. Like, and that's something that maybe she was very nervous about telling Charles about it because
Yeah.
she didn't know how Charles was going to react. Like,
Yeah, that. Yes, I think you're absolutely right on that.
like if it is a situation here where even if it's just she thinks it's something relatively, I don't want to say benign, but something that's serious but not life threatening, it's still maybe an awkward conversation to have with somebody if you're kind of
At a party.
yeah, if you're at a party, if you're worried about it. You know, I think Sazz does care about Charles, but you know, maybe Sazz has kind of a slightly skewed view of morality because she's been dating somebody who's been in prison for trying to kill Charles.
And to be fair, Charles was kind of still dating her after she was trying to kill him too. I mean, they are one and the same.
No, it's true. It's true. So, okay. Beyond just like the whodunit aspect of this episode, which I think is really, really strong, I just want to give it a little bit of flowers just for some of the humor that they put in here because there's some really, really fun moments. Like one of my favorites has to be Zach Galifianakis and the are you trying to between two ferns me line that he says to Oliver. Galifianakis has 2 minutes of screen time in this episode. I feel like he throws for 5 touchdowns in those couple of minutes. He is just amazing. I love him.
Yeah, he was really funny. I mean, Eugene Levy, of course, was very funny. Eva Longoria is someone that I've never actually seen before, never watched Desperate Housewives or anything else that she's been in. So this is my first experience with her. I thought she was really hilarious. That whole line of like, I remember when I was your age a few years ago, I was rolling. It was so funny. I think the three of them are great. I'm really excited to see more of that and more of the film and what's going on, as long as it doesn't take away
Mhm.
from this murder mystery. Sazz is a long running character on this show, and she can't get done dirty like Ben did last season.
I mean, there's a couple just other little things, like the directors being called the brothers, which felt a
The
lot
brother
like,
sisters, yeah.
yeah, it feels a lot like a reference to, there's the directors pair, the Daniels. There's a lot of like directing teams now that go by these weird, obscure names. Also, just one of my favorite one-off lines is the driver who shows up, who's just like at a coughing fit, and is asked, "Is he alive?" That killed me. The humor on this show is still just so incredible, and I think it's the combination of that and the murder mystery stuff, which is still really, really strong. Like these are the reasons that we're still here in season 4. This is why we are currently looking towards Hulu and being like, "Hi, Hulu, you are above the camera lens here. I'm just waving
Mm,
hi. Do you want to renew the show for a season 5
I
already?
know.
Put us out of our misery."
It was also great to catch up with Howard. Howard is no longer allowed to adopt any more cats, so he's got a dog now who had a job, and his job was he was a cadaver dog. And this dog was able to actually sort of bring them together to figure out that there was a murder that had happened, which then did bring them down to the incinerator. And we had this really powerful scene with Steve Martin where he's in the incinerator and he's like has ashes going through his fingers, Sazz's ashes through his fingers to actually be able to pull out, metal medical parts that she's had over the years that we had seen in her apartment, all her x-rays of like,
Mhm.
I got the broken bone over here when I did this and my hip replacement because of this. And she felt very proud of these things. And he was able to see where it was made and connect it to be like, oh my goodness, like my hands are covered in Sazz. Like it was such a sad, grim moment. And then he decides he's gonna write the murderer because he's like, okay,
Yeah.
obviously Sazz didn't write me this because here she is in my hands. Who is this? And they write back, not your friend. I'm not gonna say the whole thing, but not your friend.
Yeah.
So whoever this is, it's personal. So I'm going to say this.
Yeah.
I've got my beef hat on early.
All right. All right.
If this is somebody that they're just going to introduce to us in like episode 5 or 6 when there's only like 4 episodes left to be like, this is some lifelong blah blah yada yada through this, I'm going to be really mad. If this is supposed to be somebody who's like deeply involved in his life to the point that they wanted to kill Charles and they're going to send that text where it was so personal, I'm not your friend, I was just like, oh my goodness, this needs to be like a really big payoff.
I am okay with introducing a killer in episode 1 or episode 2, and
Mm,
maybe you don't give them a ton of screen time right away. That's why I'm kind of thinking maybe it's one of these stooges who's
mhm,
working on the movie, because at
mhm,
the very
mhm.
least we saw them. And, that's something you can build up and pay off later. Yeah, I will also be putting on a beef hat if this turns out in episode 5 or episode 6 we meet the killer for the first time. That's just a little bit too late. But speaking of those metal parts, like one thing that did kind of cross my mind here is this another bit of evidence that Sazz was not the intended target? Because if you were
Mhm.
targeting Sazz, wouldn't you know that she has an extensive history of injuries and that somebody would be able to identify her body? Or at that point, do you even care?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I feel like if you're going to be going after somebody's stunt double, that there's a possibility that there's something like that going on. I feel like if you're
Hmm.
a professional hitman is going to be able to use the sniper, take a really good shot, should be able to clean better than they did. They left blood and a bullet hole.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like a proper cleanup. And you would know your target better than that. Even sort of the idea of, I'm not a professional sniper
Yeah.
by any means, but I suspect if anybody out there is, let
Hmm.
me know in the comments that when you look through the scope, that it magnifies who you're looking at to enough of a degree, even with like, I don't know if this is made up movie magic, but like night scope where you can like see who somebody actually is, that they would be able to see that Sazz is not Charles, right? So I'm kind of like, who is this hitman? And like, okay, you can use the sniper, but like you can't clean up, you can't get your target right. You're looking through the scope and it's like close enough.
One, I'm very excited to find out how many of our viewers slash listeners are hitmen. Number two,
Let's go,
I
Sniper Squad.
I hope we do not make you angry at any point this season. I'm just going to throw that out there right now. Also,
Love to our Sniper Squad.
hey, Sniper Squad, be our friends. The one last thing I have to say about this is just Animal Jobs podcast. I'd probably listen to this if I'm going to be honest, because I like to think of myself as the world's most wholesome Reddit user. I think when we hear the word Reddit, we often think many things that are often not great all the time. But guess what? There are many wonderful places to go on Reddit. And every morning I wake up and I look at the cute cat subreddit. I see some bunnies. I see some.
I know you're on the bunnies.
I'm on the bunny subreddit,
so
but
cute.
I am also on a subreddit that is cats with jobs. That is basically like watching cat. There'll be like a cat in a box. There'll be like a cat at a computer, and it's like, oh, this cat's typing out the morning report, and I'm just like, oh, this podcast is cats with jobs, but a podcast. Sign me up, Howard. Can I be your guest? I mean, unfortunately, my cat doesn't really do anything. I don't know how useful that's going to be for your podcast.
She's good with belly rubs.
That is a job.
That is
she is
a job.
Belly rub recipient.
Yeah, she is.
Okay. All right. That is what we have here on Only Murders in the Building, Season 4, Episode 1. This was so much fun. We're so looking forward to diving into the rest of the season, and we hope you guys are as well. So hit that subscribe button so you do not miss our preview, our theory video. Just set that up earlier. Also, as we set up earlier, join our Patreon. A link is in the description below where we have a poll where you can vote on 1 or 3 shows that we are going to cover exclusively on Patreon. The choices are Tulsa King, The Penguin, or then finally The Old Man. Thank you so much to our patrons for your support. We'll see you here next time.